Hi, Maria.
Hi.
Getting to be
Hello,
that.
Paul.
Hey, Steve, how are you?
Good.
Maria, Jamie, Brian?
Hi, Paul.
Hello, Al.
How you doing, Paul?
I'm on mic. Hello.
And Paul, what is that boat picture? Is that a sailboat, or is that the rudder of another type of boat that's always on your background with the beautiful blue water?
That's my old boat. Which I really liked, except it had a very cranky diesel engine that gave me nothing but trouble. So I got rid of it, put some money in the bank and bought a smaller boat.
Ah,
You know, the best kind of boat to have.
Yeah, the
Somebody
one you can
else's.
sell. Yeah.
Somebody else's.
right.
They say the two best days in a man's life, the day he buys
Yeah.
the boat, the day he sells it.
Yep.
Been there many times.
Fun to have when it's a nice day and you're out there enjoying it, but everything in between.
I tell people that you pretty much count on spending, for every hour you're on the water, you'll be an hour working on the boat.
Mm.
Doing something, but
Cleaning the hull.
I know one of the boatyard owners, and last year and even this year, I mean, they've had waiting lists for boat slips. I mean, it's
yeah, apparently
COVID has
sales
been well.
went through the roof with COVID. Everybody thought that boating was a great way to socially distance while still getting outside. And I was lucky. I got a town mooring this year.
Oh, wow. How long were you on the waiting list?
3 years, but fortunately
Wow.
it's just a little 15-foot sailboat and only draws 18 inches with the centerboard up. So they've got me in a real shallow part of the mooring field. But yeah, if you want something deep, it's a long wait.
Yeah. Oh, there's
Susan, how are you?
Everybody,
Hi.
did we have a link tonight I couldn't find?
No.
Okay.
Jamie, Mike Ursillo is subbing for Amy tonight?
Yes, he is.
Okay, I will bring him in.
I'm always looking for those links too, Susan. Sometimes Jay sends them out at 6:45, so.
But that's
We're
actually
gonna-
good for me, as long as it's not buried in my, spam box.
Yeah.
Exactly. Me also. It's easier to look for the link that is for the meeting that night because
Right.
we get so many other links. So when it isn't sent, there's a moment of panic.
I always
Brian,
put a
you can bring
flag on
Pam
the
in
calendar
too.
one. So,
But I was,
Oh,
I was afraid it was
got
sent
her.
like a week ago.
Brian, we all set?
I will turn on the recording and we are good to go.
Hi, Mike. Welcome.
Well, it's wonderful to be back. Every now and then I have to come back and dabble and commune with all of you.
Yeah, Pam's just coming in.
I just have one request this evening. Don't
Oh,
go
don't
as
say
long
it,
as the
don't say it.
council
It'll
meeting
jinx the
did
meeting.
last night.
You'll
We
jinx the
finished
meeting.
at 10 of 12.
All right,
No,
good
we're
evening.
not doing that.
It's a work session though, Mike. We should be good.
Mike,
Good.
maybe you could give us the clip notes and just let us know.
All right, good evening, everyone. This is a work session of the South Kingstown Planning Board. The date is Tuesday, May 11th, 2021. The time is 7:02. First item on the agenda is roll call. And Pam, would you like to take care of that?
Absolutely. Steve DeMasi,
Here.
Maria Mack,
Here.
Paul Jordan.
Here.
Susan Axelrod,
Here,
Jamie Rabbit,
Present.
Brian Wagner,
Here,
Special Legal Counsel, Mike Ursillo.
Wow, what a title.
All right.
you gonna count yourself, Pam?
Pam Rubinoff,
Is
Secretary.
present. Okay, very good. All right, first item is our annual work agenda program, discussion of the annual work program and the prioritization of those items. Jamie?
Yep, Mr. Chairman, we had sent information out about 3 weeks ago, and I was just thinking this afternoon, I'll send that out so everybody has it right at the top of their email list. With regards to that initial discussion, the list had architectural design standards within various zoning districts, primarily the commercial zones, includes landscaping, lighting, and hardscapes. Next subject matter, thank you, Brian, was form density design uses, kind of 4 areas: West Kingston, Amtrak area, Peacedale, Main Street or Wakefield proper, and then Lower Tower Hill. There was a talk about farm events and looking at the regulatory review and requirements associated with value added for farms, the Route 1 stewardship, and the Route 108 special management district, as well as a general discussion and talk about historic preservation protection. So I know those were broad subject matters, but I think the discussion tonight was an attempt to try and prioritize the importance of these. So if we, kind of look at it, if everybody had $100 and you could only spend $100, and I asked you to put money in each one of these categories, would you put your entire $100 on architecture and design standards, or would you put $10 in each one? How would you spend those resources?
Jamie, with the architectural design standards, it's been in question in front of the planning board on almost every project that we look at. So whether you agree with them or not, it's very prevalent in our discussions. So I was wondering if that should not go hand in hand with the missing middle, with the cottage designs and all that. That as we're doing those reviews and what we want to see in that should not architectural standards be wrapped in with that? Or is it
Primarily-
too much to chew, to bite off?
No. The missing middle, again, those were funds coming from the Housing Authority and the collaborative. So those are primarily steered towards residential growth in that multifamily mix to duplex. And really the design standards, or if you develop design guidelines for the community, you would first look at existing vernacular within the community, what you liked and what attributes of what you liked and components from an architectural standard highlighted what South Kingstown represents. You'd also have representative photos or graphics associated with what you don't think is appropriate in town, and really develop the design guidelines through a kind of a palette discussion. And those are primarily associated with commercial, non-residential development. So they're going to be your, you know, your retail, your CVS's, Walgreens, your fast foods from McDonald's, the Burger Kings to, you know, Chick-fil-A. Not that any of those are proposed to move or come into town, but it's really looking at, if a new development came into town, what architectural style would you like them to follow? You know, you just went through the permitting of the Dollar General and your design plan review. And, you know, you took components and discussions surrounding New England style, pitched roof, clapboard, cedar shakes, but in essence, better articulating that through the development of design guidelines. But to your point, Steve, primarily focused on non-residential development. There are very few communities that look at the entire community and develop design guidelines for single-family residential, unless those single-family residential units are part of an extremely unique place. You know, an area in downtown Savannah, Georgia, where it's not a historic district, but you don't want the fabric to change to postmodern architecture or a spin of, you know, something non-traditional.
Okay.
I have a couple of comments on that. First of all, I think that the project related to the missing middle, which came from the Affordable Housing Collaborative, not the Housing Authority, should be a standalone item. I do think that while architectural standards are important, I think that they are important in all of the aspects of projects that we review. So I think that's sort of an overarching kind of theme. And I think we should be looking at that, not just related to, for example, cottages or other types of affordable projects, but commercial and others as well. And I'll probably talk in greater detail when we get to our agenda item F, which is about process. But it's important that everyone has the understanding that regardless of how good the architectural design might be of a project, there are other things like mass and scale and density that are very important concepts. Great architecture isn't going to fix a project that's poorly planned or not to a higher development standard. So I do believe that that should come at the beginning of our list in terms of priority. But I think we should discuss the other areas as well on the list this evening.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, Jamie Wright, Planning Director, just for clarity, Maria, under the, we'll say the list that Brian Wagner has on the screen right now, you would, and I agree with you that there is a connection or rational nexus between the discussion of architectural design with the net subject matter of form, density, design, and uses right below it. And again, that any design guidelines you develop needs to look at that form and that density. So is that, you're looking really at those as one subject heading?
Yes, I was, yes.
Okay.
Other thoughts from members?
Yeah, this is Paul. I was just thinking about the the farm events. I know it's come up a few times in past meetings. We've talked about doing something. I don't want to call it low-hanging fruit because I don't know what I'm talking about. It might be much more difficult than I think it is. But it seems like something, compared to some of the others, it seems like something that's more straightforward. It could be ticked off the list.
I did talk to Jamie about that today, and he thought because we're in the farming season right now, that we might have a hard time getting the associated families that might be considering it, and or the farmers that are already doing it to come in during the growing season.
Okay.
So he thought maybe we should push that off to the fall or early winter, which didn't sound like a bad suggestion. That again, we want participation from them, so that we don't create an ordinance and find out none of them like it. So
That makes sense.
And Steve, although we have that on our agenda this evening, as folks may recall, according to state law and our own local ordinances, we are required to notify farmers if we're going to be having discussions about potential changes that would affect them. So technically, there should have been notice for this. It's, I think, 2-23.1-2, 1-4. We've discussed this briefly the last time we brought this up, but I think it would be wise to have the proper notification and give everyone, we have some new members, give everyone enough of a background on what the difficulties that we have had relative to farm events and the concerns of everyone, including the landowners, the abutters, and so on.
Mr. Chairman, again, Jamie Rabbit, just for clarity, the subject matter tonight was not put on the agenda for, or in essence, a regulatory discussion. It's part of where do we go from here as far as workload. That was the intent of that.
Great. Good to hear.
Okay, so just for clarity, aware of the
Thanks,
regulatory
Jamie.
requirement of notice, but
Jamie,
it goes hand in hand with the workload discussion.
I had some
go ahead, Pam.
additions. This is a great summary of the lists. I am just wondering, I know that we've talked a lot about the implementation of the village plans. And so I wonder, because we have West Kingston and Peacedale and Wakefield, I'm just wondering if we want to, if it's taking off too much of a bite, to look at village plans while you're looking at form, density, design, and uses. And look at those implementation activities.
Yeah, I think West Kingston especially, we talked about rezoning right around the old courthouse to the Amtrak station down, I guess, to possibly the river. So that would be a priority for me as well.
I think the other comment I have, and I don't know if all of you saw the EcoRI articles today. We could forward them if you haven't, about Matunic and South Kingstown beach. And so that goes to some of the issues on erosion and changing climate. And I know that last week, John King, who's been watching these areas quite well from URI, spoke about those issues. So I'm just wondering if those need to be put on the agenda somewhere. And I know that we're looking at Jamie's $100. But I know that it's easy to push away, erosion and climate change issues because it's going to happen in the future, but it's happening more rapidly and we keep on pushing it to the distance. The big we, right? So I just wonder if that should be added or not. But I just add those comments to you.
All right, Susan?
Pam, that was a really good point. And I think we should talk about what John King talked about last week at our meeting, and becoming more resilient. I think for me, I am concerned about some horrible project coming before us that we're powerless to change because we don't have architectural standards with scale and massing. And I don't know if what we're willing to do here is make suggestions, or if we can put something on paper that's enforceable, where if someone chose to tear down one of the historic buildings right in the middle of Main Street and build something completely inappropriate, we would have teeth in an ordinance to change that course. And we did have one of those projects, what, 5 or 6 years ago. And I think at that point we were regretful we didn't already have provisions to protect a historic building in town. And I think we all pledged to immediately set something in motion to protect that from happening again. And here we are years later, and there's nothing to protect the next historic building in Peacedale or Kingston, or well, not Kingston, Peacedale and Wakefield from being demolished before our eyes. And so I think putting some sort of architectural standards, but especially to protect some historic districts and some historic buildings, is something we should do before we're sorry we didn't do it. So that for me is going to get a lot of my 100, not that all of these aren't valid, but that's going to get a chunk of my $100, because I don't want to regret later that we put something off too long and then we're powerless if a bad project comes before us.
Thank you, Susan. Jamie, have we heard from the Downtown Wakefield Association at all?
Not specifically, no.
Yeah,
To Susan's point, again, as we develop, as we work through the development of standards, designs, and architectural vernacular, Susan brings out a good point, is that if something is there and it's being proposed to be modified or taken down, that you have articulated a vision for its replacement. You know, in the worst case, it's not taking down a very important historic feature or building within the fabric of a village, whether it be Wakedale or Peacedale, and have someone propose to replace it with a CMU, which is a cement masonry unit, building with a flat roof. So, Susan, to your point, you're absolutely correct and on point that developing those types of things and layering the importance of, if you're going to manipulate the built environment, what you're replacing with it, from my view, could be considered historic 100 years from now, even if it was built in 2022. And again, first would be to save and reuse or repurpose. The second aspect is having a developer understand the expectations that if it's the planning board's goal that what is built could someday be looked at as something important within the community. Versus that, steel Butler building that's put in its place.
And we have certainly learned that National Register status offers zero protection for anything. So I'm certainly in agreement with that. I did want to add too, on this list, it says Lower Tower Hill. I'm not sure why it doesn't say Old Tower Hill Road corridor, because we've been talking about that for several years now. And that is a very important opportunity that could actually help with our missing middle housing section. We've talked a lot about what could be there, what kind of overlays could be done. We had a project with the university, with their landscape architecture studio on that corridor. So I think that that is in the village area of Wakefield, and that is a good place to create infill along with good architectural design standards, with a discussion of form, density, mass scale, and so on, and uses.
No, Marie, and I'll turn to Brian in a moment because he's been patiently down on the bottom of the screen waving at us. I think you bring up a good point, and I think as we enter this discussion and start to formulate areas and regions and vernacular, I think you're looking at, starting somewhere, half a mile south of the Saugatucket on Main Street. And then you have similar architectural vernacular as you come up and turn the corner to the east, up until where the green line is, and green line's moving in the bike shop. And then you have a slight transitional zone of residential and converted residential into office. You get into the CVS area in the Four Corners, and then you change to the big box vernacular, as you head up towards Route 1. I think there's this layered approach to try and cement some theme throughout that area as a corridor. And it's there. These are intended to be bullets for discussion purposes, but I think you bring up a good point that it's really a discussion of from the school at Route 1 all the way down through past CVS, around the corner by Green Line, the new Green Line building, and then all the way past Peter's shop, and then all the way past the mansion, which was slated for a condo development, and maybe just a little bit further down because that commercial zone sneaks into that area. There's one single family house for sale just across from the vet that, we occasionally get a call about converting that to office or some other retail type medical use. So again, I think it's important, and that would play right to Susan's, that you wouldn't want to see that home and that architecture torn down and then a modern office building with no architectural standards built. I'm sure we'd push back, from staff and everyone as a planning board to try and steer that redevelopment of that property, but it's much easier with standards in place. Brian, if I can,
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman,
I had a couple of comments for the chair on these issues. First, with respect to the issue of historic buildings, I can tell you that I have one member of the Historic District Commission and others as well, but one in particular who is extremely anxious to get into the discussion of historic structures outside of the Kingston Historic District and doing more to preserve those. And I think that the planning board could really leverage assistance from the Historic District Commission. In fact, they would very much like to have a joint work session with the planning board to try and address some of those issues. And they could probably run with a lot of the work on your behalf. So you might be able to farm that out, so to speak. Also, since I have the floor, I'll use it, but to latch on to what Pam was saying, I too believe that the issue of coastal erosion is extremely important to discuss. I think that is a very long-term discussion because the issues are going to be so difficult to deal with, and it's going to take a long time to be able to influence coastal property owners into what may or may not be necessary in those areas, particularly when it comes to getting people to buy onto issues like coastal retreat. Because in some instances, that's going to be the only option. Because if you harden your coastline against erosion, you lose everything that everybody loves about the coastline to begin with. So I feel that that is a long-term 5, 10, 20-year discussion that needs to happen and continually happen in order to get buy-in.
Thank you, Brian.
Can I just say, I agree with Brian and Pam 100% about the coastal issue. Saying it's going to be a 20-year discussion worries me, because I think it's going to be a lot sooner than that we're going to see the next big storm do damage that we haven't seen in South Kingstown since 1938. Particularly that Tunic area where the seawall is the only thing that's protecting that water line out to a neighborhood that, could become an island. I don't know if we have 20 years to talk about that. I think it's a conversation that needs to get started in earnest sooner, and it is going to be a difficult conversation. Coastal property owners don't want to hear that they might have to give something up. I keep hearing from other places that people expect to be bought out, and I don't think that's a realistic option with climate change. So it is a hard discussion, and all the more reason to start it soon.
And, in the broader context of climate change, this came up during our discussions in the comprehensive plan, particularly given the fact that we had a specific element devoted to what was called natural hazards and climate change. But our initial goal was to have a theme of climate change running throughout the comprehensive plan. And I don't think you can talk about climate change without also looking at flooding and stormwater, drought, other things that impact our ecosystem. So I think in addition to coastline issues, there's also the real problems that we hear about at almost every public hearing related to flooding and stormwater. And I think that's worthy of a good discussion. And I want to add that Brian was one of the participants in Will Green's class that did the Old Tower Hill Road corridor. So he will be a great resource. And that particular project went from Dale Carlisle all the way up to the intersection of Route 1. So Jamie, that's the area that I was referring to.
No, to Brian, just to follow up on Brian's point, the discussion, I think, is on climate change is long, extensive, and involves multiple parties, and it's much bigger than just the planning board. I know the town is, the town manager's office has discussed it, public service, town engineer, there's money being put into seawall restoration and sheet piling and armoring some of the assets that the community has. So I think it's not, to Paul, to your question, it's not a quick 6-month fix. It's going to be a conversation that goes on for years, and I hope the community never stops talking about it, because it is going to continue to evolve as we see changes in storm events and frequency and intensity of those events. So it's something that the town's going to have to move to the forefront, both from a planning perspective and some aspects of financial perspective and their capital program to armor some of those assets that the community has. So I think it's not a short window for the planning board to find a solution. I think in anything we do with regards to design or modifications to the regulations, listening to Susan and Pam, as well as Maria and Steve and you, Paul, that we need to be conscientious of the climate changes. So as we're making changes to the regulations, in the back of our mind, we need to remember about what do these changes do with relationships to stormwater and drought tolerant materials if we're talking about landscaping. what they do with regards to water sources. Are they affecting flooding? So, if we change the word within a regulation, does it have an impact on climate? Can we change the regulations with regards to the design to impact positively efforts associated with climate change? I think, to Brian's point, it's a long, broad discussion, but we can't lose focus on even the small changes that the planning board may contemplate still can have little incremental effects in a positive way on climate change.
And
And
you know,
is this something we could bring in a consultant for and maybe even apply for a grant?
It's possible that, it is a hot button topic. There are potentially resources out there.
I mean, to bring in the expertise and, as you stated, the planning staff with everything that's before us now. And again, this is a big project, a long-term project that, we might need some outside consultants to kind of get us kicked off and on the right path.
Again, you are doing some wonderful things. You don't have low impact development design guidelines, but you do have aspects associated with it with regards to requiring pervious pavement, and
Just
some
not
storm
enough.
management. You took one
and-
step, you may be
and-
able to take two.
And Jamie, you just brought up something very important, the low impact design standards. Earlier, Brian had a very good idea about farming work out, delegating and collaborating with other committees. I think that it would be well worth our time to collaborate with the Conservation Commission with regard to LID standards. I think that's something that could help us immediately. And we would see the impacts of that for quite some time. So obviously it takes a comprehensive view and it's complicated, but certainly wherever we can get help and collaborate, I think that's a smart idea.
Paul, you had your hand up first.
Well, I heard Pam say it's not enough, and I always think about the town of Bristol, is actually planning to abandon a section of road that wraps around the north end of Bristol Harbor. They're looking at it and they're saying, we can't keep rebuilding this every time it's destroyed. And they're talking to DM about rerouting a road through Colt Park to get down into Papa's-Squatch. But, that's a popular road, and the town has recognized that they can't keep it with climate change and increased storm frequency and intensity. And I think that's the kind of planning, where I say you need to start that conversation soon, because it will take a long time to get people to agree to that sort of drastic step. Hardening, armoring, those are things that just make it somebody else's problem. If you harden the shoreline, you're just causing erosion somewhere else. So again, I think those kinds of difficult decisions, if we're going to take this seriously, they're going to be hard conversations still getting around it. But I look to Bristol as sort of the leader in that kind of drastic thinking. So.
Pam?
Yeah, thank you, Paul. I think the other one is Warren that is doing a
Right.
transfer of development rights
Yep.
to get properties out of the floodplain. And so there's a lot going on, but maybe the suggestion, and actually South Kingstown, along with other South Coast communities, are part of this Army Corps of Engineers grant project that's looking at elevating residential properties and businesses. And I know that they're moving forward with that. I don't know if they got the state match for that, but so that's going to have a lot of impact in terms of both visual impact as well as potential buyouts. And so I wonder, as Jamie pointed out, there's a lot going on with the planning board and the planning department, but is this an opportunity to actually have a committee within town hall, to incorporate infrastructure, the town manager, planning, conservation, some citizen engagement, and just a working group, maybe not a committee, a working group to really discuss some of this stuff, because it does, we keep on kicking the can down the road. Sorry, this is my day job, but I'm seeing it happen, and I'm also seeing these great, great successes. And South Kingstown has a couple, but I see other towns really moving ahead on some of these issues. So there's a lot to be learned, and I just wonder if there's a different way to supplement the planning board's work agenda with, and I know the town manager has been thinking about this. I've worked on projects with him on this. So it's just a potential to kind of see how it might be done in a different way if it can't be specifically on the planning board agenda.
Pam. Jamie, have you gotten any insight on how this list is going to be prioritized based on our conversation tonight?
I think so, but I am gonna need everyone's $100. From you too, Mike. Again, a lot of it is we'll look at our workflow, we'll look at our capabilities in-house. I in the budget for this coming fiscal year, there's a small amount for consulting monies. It's only 10,000, but the bulk of any monies associated with consulting comes in the following fiscal year under the capital improvement program. I have asked questions about additional resources that may be realized within the department because of our staffing levels in this past fiscal year, and if that we can encumber those funds and potentially use them towards your work program, that would be appreciated. I have had that discussion with both the town manager and Zach Soul, the director of finance, to see if there are funds that can be encumbered that the planning board could have access to starting on July 1. I have experience with design guidelines, but it is a tremendous amount of labor or admin time that needs to be managed. And also it's a commitment by the planning board also to meet. I'm waiting for those meetings in person where we can sit and, spend an hour and go through slideshows about, buildings within the community, buildings around New England, and what you feel the vernacular, the good vernacular is for the community. And if something new was built, and if it happens to be in Massachusetts or Portland or Portsmouth or Portland, would that be appropriate for South Kingstown? Does that fit with what South Kingstown's about? And is that something you should use as an example? Because, at some point, I'd love to drive around town with each one of the planning board members and you tell me what you really think is fascinating about the town from an architectural standpoint, and also point out what you would potentially discourage someone to replicate. So that's kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly. And that starts the discussion on the architectural vernacular that's important to the community. And that takes a considerable effort to hone in on those aspects, because that's important. South Kingstown's a special place, and you don't want it to just look like some other town. You want it to look like South Kingstown. You want the important things to be replicated. But it's also, you are a shoreline community. There's shared architectural features among other shoreline communities from Maryland to Bar Harbor. So if there's a beautiful building in one of those communities and a developer was looking to build and it's a larger building than what South Kingstown has, what example would you want that developer to follow? What would you want them to do? If someone came in and proposed a new block in downtown, what do you want that block to look like? It may not be a replication of what exists there. It may actually be, in your view, as residents of the community, a nicer, more modern articulation of that historic vernacular that will stand the test of time and be viewed as, an expansion of the fabric of the community. Well, that's a decision that I don't make as the planning director. That's a decision the community makes. I'll help you articulate, through visioning, but those are your calls. We'll try and set the table for you. But you ultimately get to decide what it is you want. And I think that's important.
Okay. Thank you.
So I will try and prioritize a list for distribution in the next few weeks.
Okay. Good. Any final comments on this subject before we move on?
And Mr. Chairman, is it okay? We are down to planning board members today. If, again, those two members, one is due to an illness in the family, the other is due to travel arrangements that were delayed. Would anyone be offended if I reached out to those just to touch base and go over what was discussed tonight to see if there's, they would spend their $100 differently?
No, that'll save us another meeting.
Okay.
I think they'll all be happy about that.
Okay.
Sounds
Thank
good.
All right, next item is our South Kingston Home Style Program.
Wait, I'm sorry, 1 second before we move on. Jamie, if you're going to reassemble this list in the priorities we talked about tonight, would you also consider adding a line for a couple of items about your thoughts about where we would get started, bringing in a parallel agency to take some of the weight off of the planning board? Like we talked about the Historic District Commission. You talked about maybe making some sort of working committee. Is it possible to put together a couple of ideas about what would work as a parallel organization to help us get through some of this?
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. Again, to Mr. Damasi's point, his comment that the planning board would appreciate perhaps reducing their meeting load, but there may be individuals within the community on other boards and commission that can work as a small working group, as a sounding board in a much easier format, as a rapid response team almost to ideas and suggestions. I can look at that format if that's the consensus of the board and throw a few ideas together.
Okay, great. All right, so we're going to move on to the SK Homestyle project. You want to bring that PowerPoint you had up, Jamie?
I think Brian's gonna.
Or Brian, I should say.
Just bear with me, Mr. Chairman. I'm working on a couple of computer screens today, so I'm pulling up that document on a desktop.
Did it come up on the screen? I did
Yeah,
share.
Brian, you want to just
Okay.
come to the second page? So, Mr. Chairman, as the planning board's familiar, we have worked through the first phase. So Horsley Witten was engaged to help the community talk about the missing middle, in essence, which is from that kind of cottage, single-family development in a dense, compact nature around a common central theme, such as a town green or open space area, all the way up to mixed use, first floor commercial, second floor residential development, which is kind of the last aspect of the study. So being kind of three chunks of the cottage community being the first aspect, and that's the single family development. The second aspect is looking at the middle of the missing middle. Cottages being on the low end or left side of the scale, and then on the right side of that being the mixed use Tower Hill type development where you would have retail on the first floor, residential on the second, or some revamping of the villages in Peacedale and Wakefield, given the scale and size of the buildings with multi-floors. But the discussion tonight is really between the town manor houses, which are anything from 2 to 6, the conversion of those, the construction of new, up to standard townhouses from 2 to 6 units, and then also village apartments, which are up 6 to 12 units. And it's that discussion of those type of developments at this point in time before we get into a larger scale of, standalone apartment complexes, stacked flat apartments, and then the much larger, 30, 40, 50 unit single building structures. And that's a discussion, not something that the community and the planning board may be in favor of, but it's part of the discussion of the missing middle. So what you have before you is information prepared by Horsley Witten and Jeff Davis's team, as well as Union Studios. Primarily, what you see on the slide before you is, townhouses, manor houses, and village apartments. And in the initial discussion, as we kind of flip the process on its head to show you the articulation of what the units look like, what the comfort level was with regards to density, and if the planning board is comfortable with the style, form, scale, and then the density per acre, as well as the unit makeup, that we would then write the regulations to steer development to achieve the intended results. So again, you have townhouses, manor houses, and village apartments as part of the discussion tonight. So again, as Brian's panning down, the first one that you have are townhouses. And again, this is discussion I touched upon a little bit earlier on the work program. There are limited examples within your community, and there are examples outside of your community. And it's part of the discussion of what's good or what you would be comfortable replicating within the community, and what exists outside the community that you would be comfortable if it was built within. So they've used it at the very top of the screen is Red Mill. That's in Norton, Massachusetts. They're, in essence, some of the buildings are 2 to 260 feet long. They're 40 to 50 feet wide. But when you walk on the street, they play as single family in nature. They have a human scale to them. And again, I have hundreds of photos of this development, and Union Studios and I have some common ground on here that we think it's a well-done community within the Massachusetts framework that replicates some New England style architecture that's appropriate from a street and scale perspective. If you look at the buildings from an aerial, you would be concerned about the mass, but if you visited this community and walked around, the scale feels very pleasing and comfortable. The building below this is a design from Union Studios that they have used in a few locations. This is a 3-unit townhouse, and it shows how that would play. 2 primary dormers, 1 main ridge line. So there's multiple roof planes here, and 3, actually, sorry, this is a 4-plex. It plays as almost looking like 3 units. There's a right-hand unit, left-hand unit, and if you look closer, there's 2 center doors. The example below is from the village of Kingstown, Rhode Island, in the URI neighborhood. And again, that's a traditional historic row house within the community. So there's, your historic kind of old vernacular within the community, and then a modern interpretation above that. And again, we may need to do more photos and more representative styles with regards to the discussion. And again, it shows on this slide too, as we break down the components of a townhouse, but it's really articulating, well fenestrated entrances, variations in roof lines, variation in planes as it relates to front facades. So it's not just if it's a building that's 120, 140 feet long, it's not one vertical plane, that it's broken up. And, you know, I'm even a believer that when you make those changes in planes, there should be a minimum distance. I've seen developers try and do 6 inches on a 200-foot long building, and 6 inches doesn't play well. It doesn't even really create a shadow line. So kind of the bigger or longer the building, the taller the building, the bigger steps they need to make along that vertical plane, as well as the horizontal plane also. But again, here's an example of a building in the middle where it's showing, in essence, a long building. It's that 4 units, but it's utilizing 2 gable ends that are slightly smaller than the traditional main box. And you could look at this, in essence, as a large double wing colonial with a center colonial box with 2 additional wings on it, but it houses 4 units. They've also added dormers to the roof line in an attempt to break up that one linear plane. And again, there's some discussion, if you'll see, you know, that the dormer length has to be 50% of the roof length, that the roof span has a maximum of 45 feet. You can't have anything less than a 412 roof. Frontage per unit is limited, and the unit area is limited at 20,000 square feet, and it's limited at 2.5 stories. Smallest could be 2 units, largest could be 6 units. Again, in the lower left-hand corner, which is from Greenwich, Rhode Island, you'll see a duplex. That's a historic older building. And again, you can see some of the fenestration on the roof line with bracketing. You can see large corner board elements, again, articulating the main entrance. You have fenestration above all of the windows. So you have, you know, aprons on all of them, and you also have top lines. To the right, standard cottage. That's a single family that was converted into a duplex. And you really, from the street, if you drove by quickly, you wouldn't see that there are 2 doors there. The actual railing height's almost the bottom portion of the door. Any questions or comments on the townhouses?
I had a general question. These are very nice images. Thank you, Jamie. Could you explain how important the issue of contextual design is in terms of how, so that we're not looking at these things in isolation, how the appropriateness of a particular size or style stays within the village feel and scale, and how this can be done, but yet be sensitive to the place?
Maria, that's the challenge, right? I don't have probably a magical answer to that will make you 100% comfortable. But what's difficult is you're in a community with a fairly historic built environment with limited opportunities for infill. So what you're going to see is, in some aspects, an elongation of these corridors. So we'll use, everybody's familiar with Main Street. And if you look at the area between CVS and the bike shop on Main Street, you're going past the phone company's brick building. And if you look at it, there's a lot of probably 1,500 to 2,000 square foot footprint, kind of larger Main Street style homes there. I think over time, you may have a expansion of those homes or addition of those homes, or potentially there's only one vacant lot in that area that has an opportunity to build. So what's difficult, Maria, to your point, is if you're going to allow this density just beyond your formal downtown cores or village cores aren't like this. So it's gonna be tricky from a massing standpoint to work on this. And that's why I discussed originally, and I haven't been able to have the discussion with Donald Powers of in those transitional zones of potentially doing the big house, small house, back house, barn. So when you look at it from the street, you'll see that traditional colonial style kind of center chimney building, and it will be elongated behind it for that small house, back house, barn that could hide a 4 or 6-plex. But from the street, it would read as a single family. A lot of the buildings in the first townhouse example aren't going to read as single family from the street. So that, to your point, Maria, that's the challenge. And I think we have an opportunity to maybe have one more variation on that townhouse, and that is to have it read as a single family from the street, and it runs internal to the property and not elongated along the frontage. We've just had a development before you in the CVS vicinity that may have been a opportunity for very well done 4 or 6-plex unit buildings that could act as a transitional zone between the commercial area and single family. And if you built those 4 or 6 units closer to the street, you could build a streetscape, and then you would have back a house could be potentially greener and offer a transitional zone to the single family neighborhoods in that particular location to the west. But I think it's in that townhouse, Union Studios examples right now are very linear in nature, and they don't have an elongated option. I'd like them to challenge them to do that elongated model, on a narrow lot that may only have 100 feet of frontage, but goes back 400 or 500 feet. And those are a lot of the Main Street lots in Wakefield and Peacedale are narrow, but deep or deeper. They're 70 feet wide, but 200 or 300 feet deep. So you have that opportunity there without changing the dynamics of the street. That is a challenge, Maria. I hope that answered your question to some aspect.
Yes, thanks.
Other comments, board members? It's a good
All
start,
right.
Jamie. I did have seen some townhouses, duplexes down in Narragansett that they set the second unit back a little, so it kind of breaks up that linear facade. So that might be something we can get a picture of as well.
If someone has a particular address or a building, or you can describe or send me an email, if it's within close, we'll take a look at it and we'll analyze it and try and take from that form. May not be the architecture that meets South Kingstown's kind of vibe, but we're looking at building form too. You can skin a building in various different ways, but if you think there's a really cool building that could play as a townhouse, I think if anyone's familiar with the Charlestown package store that was redone to look kind of like a colonial building with a barn, that articulates well as a liquor store, but also could be a wonderful 4-plex in the right setting in the right community. So I have photographs of that building, because to me, some buildings aren't just commercial in nature. They could play both commercially, office, and residentially well altogether.
And those are often the ones with the best design, the best architecture.
The difficulty is we always see the examples of well-done projects. And some of those projects are done by the well-known or even not so well-known, but talented designers and architects. Unfortunately, not every developer who comes before a community either has the resources or knowledge that that talent exists there. So I think part of the planning board's job is also articulating that there are a lot of successes out there. And one of the keys to success is if you see a beautiful building in another community and you're thinking of replicating that there, find out who designed it, find out who built it, utilize those same design resources.
Yeah, the Charleston Liquor Store was a good example, Jamie. When that was being built, I was driving by there all the time, and you never would have thought it was going to be a liquor store. I mean, that was a labor of love that they put into building that. And again, you wouldn't have thought it was going to be a liquor store.
Right.
So actually, you guys reminded me of that the Charlestown Liquor Store actually also had some great stormwater practices. The parking lot has impervious pavers for not the roadway, but for the parking spaces. So I wonder, it makes me wonder, going back to Maria's point, and that climate change is, that stormwater, for instance, should be incorporated into all of these, and we do have some of those requirements already. Are there ways to kind of, pepper this with some of those other things, like say, and this green space could be green infrastructure, and this parking area could be infiltrated, in certain ways? I'm just wondering if we could, I know that complicates things, but is there a way to just kind of put, kind of like hint, there are other things to consider here too, including, this is a great opportunity for X, Y, or Z, and it might not only be green infrastructure, but I use the Charlestown example in many of my presentations as an example of a great place, and they've incorporated this other element to it.
Like, Pam, to your point, the low impact development designs that they incorporated in that site, we have discussed with a few developers recently as a good example of how to do it, right down to, the paving material that they used, or the block material they used, incorporated the line striping. So they changed brick pattern within the pervious pavers to do the line striping, as well as the handicap or accessibility feature associated with the ADA space. So, that there are good examples that exist out there that you don't have to recreate. You just point the appropriate people to them and ask them to replicate. We can potentially put some buzzwords within here. I think a lot of it, when you're talking about the density that you're going to allow, is going to require the developer to go to low impact development and use those unique green infrastructure features in order to get the density as it relates to managing stormwater and managing pervious versus impervious surfaces. So I think you're going to see them by need and necessity. But again, we can try and put some of that in there. I'll talk to Jeff David. Again, we wanted to articulate the vision for you as a planning board and then create the regulations versus writing the regulations. And I knew the first question you would ask me is, these are great regulations, Jamie. Now what is it going to look like? Maria would ask the question she asked right off the bat tonight about, well, these are all words. What does it play as it affects the street? How does it play? Is it linear? Is it non-linear? Will it play nice with its neighbors to the left, right, in front and behind it? So again, we're trying to articulate the vision, then we'll develop the language to create the articulation of the drawings and pictures.
Could I ask,
Everybody-
could I ask a question? What's the relationship between the manor house or the apartment style condo, apartments with affordable housing? Like, does this work like a comp plan or inclusionary zone? How does that work with affordable units?
So Susan, anything over 6 units is, you're looking at the incentive zoning. So they would require to do the LMI units. It also could mean that someone could comp permit you. But if they do, then they're beholden to the state standards associated with their mix of units. The issue is, you can develop the design standards and someone could always comp permit you and try and argue that they can't meet your stringent design standards because that would make the units unaffordable. But those are risks you take today, even without the design guidelines.
Yep.
Right? You have those conversations with developers now that they can't do this or they can't do that because it affects their ability to make a unit affordable to the market. So I wouldn't shy away from that. You do point out a fault probably to the permitting process is that someone can ask for relief of the regulations when they do a comp permit.
Right.
I've had discussions recently with a potential developer looking at property in the community. They do not want to come to the community and utilize a comprehensive permitting process. But your design regulations right now may not give them enough flexibility from lot coverage setback to mirror some of the development that exists in the neighborhood that's non-conforming. So they may utilize comprehensive permitting processes available through state law to have that design flexibility. Their discussions are is they don't want to reduce their architectural aspects of the development, but in order to make the development fit within the community, they need relief from side yard setbacks and front yard setbacks because some of the buildings in the area are non-conforming. They want to come closer to the street where the regulations don't allow them to come closer to the street. They may need, slightly increase impervious surfaces, but they're willing to do low impact development with regards to treating their storm drainage. So there are some trade-offs, and there are some developers who will use a comprehensive permit for flexibility, not for just pushing a product. Right? I think you've seen a push of product right now in some applications versus
It's a very polite way to say it, Jamie.
That's my experience showing, Maria, I guess. As a younger planner, maybe I stepped in it a few times with regards to my choice of words. But again, there are developers who are going to push that envelope, and there are developers who are going to look at your regulations and try and be beholden to them. But without regulations, they're not quite sure where the bar is or where the standard is. I admire the board for having the discussion.
All right,
Is everybody else set? I'll just run through Manor House. So again, the aspects of the Manor House are looking at that, in essence, conversion of a large estate home into multiple units. I think one of the good examples is actually at the bottom of the picture, bottom right-hand page. It is not in South Kingston or South Kingstown. It is actually in Stonington Borough. It is one of the first homes that you see as you enter Stonington Borough, as you come across Amtrak's bridge. And there's actually 3 homes on this property. And I believe there's a total of 8 units on the property. And this was the former, in essence, ship captain's house that has been converted. You have a good example just above it that is actually in the village of Kingston. And again, it's that conversion of a larger home that may need a substantial financial investment with regards to insulating and HVAC systems that a lot of single owners can, or single-family homeowners can no longer afford. And it gives an opportunity to, I think, Susan's point about saving historic property, but renovating it for a new use. I think some of the difficulties, and it's in the regulations, you have in the Kingston, you have a stairwell that you can see on the right-hand side. Most modern regulations associated with conversions do not allow exterior stairwells. So there would have to be an addition built onto that home that would house a stair tower. And again, a good architect could blend that in as a gable bump out that would house a stairwell. And that stairwell would be fire rated and have fire doors to the interior, so it would be a safe haven. Again, that's two good examples. And both of those, if it kind of goes back to my main large house, small house, back house, barn discussion. These read relatively narrow, and they read as single family estate homes from the street versus the picture in the top right, which leads as a much longer linear home. Again, that is a redo, so that plays as a townhome now, and that is 4 units in Salem, Massachusetts.
I love these examples, Jamie. I like how how they combine, you guys combine some of the local stuff with the regional. But I always love that house in Kingston. I don't live there, but passing it always makes me smile.
And I have seen in my career of 30 plus years where someone has actually taken a house like that and converted it back to single family.
Oh, wow.
Because that's the resources they have. But I've also seen a lot of these large manor homes in other communities, older downtowns throughout Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, that struggle over time to maintain the investment. So they were well-intended conversions that lost their luster over the years, that literally, and I should take some photographs of them and share them with you, of where they were not well conceived in the a lot of the homes were built pre-automobile. When the automobile came in, they accommodated 2 cars, but when the conversion came in and turned it into a 4-plex, they didn't anticipate the 12 cars that will be on site. So you have cars parked on dirt areas of lawn, you have cars parked on grass and lawn areas, and then you have 4 to 6 families with their stuff around the unit. And part of that is just management. And I think any aspect that when we write a regulation, that there has to be a management aspect to any of these. In essence, there needs to almost be a small homeowners association held to a high standard as the building plays nice with its neighbors. These are the good examples. I'll show you some of the not so nice examples of what you need to make sure the regulations don't allow. And again, the next page is the articulation of what that building envelopes relates to with regards to units are 2 to 6, so 2.5 stories. The height is 40 feet, unit area is 1,200 square feet, 5,000 square foot buildings, and the maximum is 3,200 square feet. So they're going to play as big estate homes or mansion homes. Minimum frontage is 20 to 50 feet, 412 roofs, maximum roof span is 50, and then dormer length or something has to be within 75% of the roof length. And then again, an attempt to break that up. And then we have some examples.
Sorry, Jamie, can I interrupt? Can I just understand, if we're really promoting converting our older houses into multi-unit buildings, how do these requirements for size and square footage, how does, aside from new development, how can these requirements for square footage and height and size be applicable to an existing structure that's being modified?
Well,
Like, for example, you've got maximum, you must have a front porch. Does that mean you're expecting a building to be modified to include a front porch? You know what I'm
in
saying?
essence, this really articulates new construction, Susan.
Okay,
We have existing regulations that allow the conversion of that large estate home into multifamily in some areas of the community. But the point's taken, and we'll take a closer look at that. You know,
So-
again, we're building the vernacular for what you would consider a mansion house. We need to develop the language, and the language needs to be comprehensive as it relates to new construction and conversion.
right. So what we're talking about here is new construction, but I love all of the old examples, but you've got, all of your examples are 200-year-old buildings. So might it be worthwhile to add in an example of something built now that's a brand new building, but that fits that criteria that we're looking for? Because we don't expect them to try to build a house that necessarily looks like it's been in Kingston Village for 200 years. You know what I mean?
Right. We'll look at a modern, we'll look for those examples.
Okay.
I know I have the duplex. And then I think of a fourplex.
I think Susan's point is well taken. That particular image may be, and perhaps Susan knows better, the only real multifamily unit in Kingston, certainly within the historic district.
You're talking about the townhouse? So
Yes.
there's a bunch of rooming houses, and I don't know if that's being included in this or not too. There are a bunch of buildings like the Kingston Inn where the kids might or might not have a hot plate, but they're not separate apartments. And
That's
whether or
the,
not,
that's the village apartment discussion. That's the next segment of housing. Again, the manor houses are really intended to be a conversion of an estate home into between 2 and 6 units for the construction of a new build that will play as an estate or manor home. So it'll read from the street like that Kingston example or the Stonington Borough example. It won't look like a square box 4-unit apartment building with a center hallway and one door. You know, that's why you're developing these standards. Because if you just said, hey, you can build 4-unit apartment complexes along Route 108, and I'm just using this as an example. I'm not doing this, but you know, along the Route 108 corridor between Wakefield and URI, you may have some developers who are going to start throwing up square boxes with flat roofs, and that's not what your vision is. So if someone came to you and said, well, what is the possibility if I even bought a single family home on the Route 108 corridor and built something that looked like an estate home, and here's what it would look like, would it be okay if it looked like this in that setting? Would the planning board be okay with that? You know, and that would, you know, that allows 3 more families to move into an area where only 1 family was allowed before. And again, I'm just using that as an example because people are familiar with the 108 corridor on the planning board. And there may be segments of the 108 corridor where it's appropriate, and other areas may determine it are inappropriate. And you could always lose a home to a natural event or an environmental event, and someone wants to replace it, but the market isn't for a single family home in Wakefield or Peacedale. This gives them the opportunity to replace it, but you're going to help frame the articulation of the replacement. Yeah. And again, you're seeing the good. I'll give you a quick PowerPoint of the not so good. So you can, I think it's important sometimes to have that as part of the process so everybody understands that's not what we're looking for, and that's not representative of what we think a duplex is or what we think a manor home is.
Can I ask one more question? Why do we have maximum frontage? We have minimum frontage of 20 feet and maximum frontage of 50 feet.
The intent for these was infill. I will ask that question of our design team.
Okay,
They might be trying to match, like you said, existing homes in the area. Right, any other questions for Jamie?
Okay, the next segment for discussion tonight is the village apartment in the missing middle. And these are, again, slightly larger than the discussion associated with manor homes. And these would be 6 to 12 units and 2.5 stories for that. So again, we have examples of these. We have the examples from New York. We have an example from Kingston, Rhode Island. And we also have one from Princeton, New Jersey. And I think part of this also from my perspective is these are these weren't built for this purpose. They were buildings that were converted, but also the mindset, if someone went to build one of these, are you okay if they replicated any one of these 3 representative photos? So, although they're an example within the community, if a developer came to you and said, I wanted to build the middle photo, would the planning board be okay with that? So, and then the next page gives you the schematics of what that would look like. The building they're showing in essence is a modern building. Union Studios has used this in a number of TND development schematics, traditional neighborhood design communities, as their 6 to 12 unit apartment. It is serviced, if you'll see it, with one main entrance, a second primary access and shared entrance, and hallway and elevator would be within that area, that common area. So in most aspects, you would potentially have 6 units on the right-hand side and 6 units on the left, for a total of 12 in that building. 2 units per floor.
So Jamie, help me to understand here, would this be appropriate in, we're talking about a village, apartments. Would this be appropriate in Main Street? In your mind?
That's a discussion for the board, and that's part of our job is to articulate the vision. And perhaps what we need to do is, we are trying to be conscientious of a budget, but Pam, to your point, we did it for cottages where I plopped down one of the schematics in a neighborhood within South Kingstown as a representation of what would fit. And I think, to your point, where does this fit within Main Street corridor? If we'll take from, Peter DeStefano's contracting office, and showroom all the way up to CVS, does this building fit anywhere? If there was a
Well,
lot.
these are, as you talked about earlier, that, was it Red Mill that was very linear, it was 200 some feet long. Lower, Old Main Street, Old Wakefield is very linear. Most of those buildings, the bell block, they're all interconnected with a common wall. If they're not, there's like a 1 foot separation. So, you know, this might fit in along there and not stand out because it's interconnected. So
You
it
get-
might look like it fits in more so than if it was down by the coffee shop that just closed down by Monroe Realtors.
Right.
Or if you had, if, God forbid, Wakefield School should be used in the future for housing, or, one of those areas would, again, going back to, I think, Susan's point of the linear, could these be used in clusters as opposed to just linear? So yeah, those are just, because we
So-
don't want to, I think that your point is well taken, that we like giving examples, but we don't want to lock people into a certain thing that might not be appropriate for all those areas that could use it.
Right. And so the planning board approved a multifamily project on Kingston Road on 108 without design standards. If you had an opportunity and the developer was looking for a certain yield and you could meet the financials, which type of development would you want there? Would you want what is being built there or a slight variation of that? Would you prefer this building there with 12 units or the building they chose? So if it happened again, what would you choose? Or what would you steer them in a direction? These are examples, so it's not a you have to build this. You have to aspire to be something like this, articulating the roof pitches, the roof planes, the horizontal treatments, the vertical treatments, the central corridor, the covered entries. You look at a building like this and, taller buildings have a top, middle, and a bottom. This at least has a top and a bottom, kind of somewhat articulation of a middle. I think we see a lot of modern buildings that don't, even in cities that are 4, 5, 6 stories that don't have a top, don't have middle, don't have a bottom. They just have one vernacular associated with all 6 floors. And then you look at the historic building next to it and you realize it has a top, it has a very distinct middle, and it has a very distinct bottom architecture that actually reads to the street. And some of these are all shown, someone in the community may have a 4-acre site in the lower in Tower Hill area that may, instead of doing, a stacked flat, may want to do 6 of these buildings. So how do 6 of these on a property read together? We're looking at 1, but there are a few properties where maybe 6 of these, or it's a variation of one is a mansion house, one is one of these, one is a townhouse. So it looks a little bit different, but they all work together. Right now, you have no guidance for that type of property, other than you allow multifamily housing on.
Jamie, I think to your point about creating a situation in which a potential applicant does not feel that they have to use the comprehensive permit route is a really good one. But when you talk about what might fit in, you also have to think about not only what surrounds a particular building or buildings, but where's the parking going to go, and what are the limitations of the site.
Maria, in the perfect planning world that I work in, everyone's using public transit, so there is no need for a car. And again, we look at some wonderful buildings in some historic villages, and I have to remind myself, and I've reminded a lot of planners and young designers, that these look wonderful because they were built and placed on the property before there were automobiles, and that beautiful barn in the back that now is converted into 2 units. That was the actual carriage barn that had horses and carriage and, and the associated staff to take care of those animals. So yeah, to a point, these are perfect world, perfect scenarios. And if you have these 12 units, where do you put the 18 parking spots, right? And maybe you can accommodate 4 on the street, but you still are going to need, 12 to 14 on the site.
So I have a question. I don't know if it's for Jamie, because Jamie, you weren't here yet. I'm trying to understand how this fits in on Main Street in among the buildings that are there. So there's that new-ish yellow bank that's sort of sitting up on a hill next to the suburban dry cleaner. Do you know how big that is? Like, do you have any idea what the square footage of that? I think it blends in with the street beautifully, and it's a new building, but I don't know how to compare it the scale to this.
That would be comparable to the building you're looking at now on the screen.
Okay.
And that's probably, that's a good example because that plays well as a bank. And I think because it's large and it sits in essence on a pediment, it's okay that it's set back a little bit, because I think if it was brought to the street, it may be a little bit imposing as it reads, to the south and north of that with the surrounding architecture. But that building could be repurposed and turned to apartment someday. Right? If it outlived its useful life as a bank. And I think the architecture would work well as an apartment building or a stack flat. And one of the other discussions too that we have as planners trying to work with communities on design is, do you completely hold on to what the appearance of the street is today, or are you designing and building for the future, honoring what's there today? Because if you look at the historic nature of a downtown, there were single-story buildings at one point in time in that downtown, and there were smaller homes, and those were torn down, and 2-story buildings were built, and in some instances, 3-story buildings were built. So they changed that discussion at a point in time. And do you hold on to what's there, or do you allow a slight variation that supports the growth that you're striving for in the future to put boots on the ground in a downtown? If a downtown, we take a stretch of downtown and that only has 20 single family homes right now, that's only 20 families, where you have an opportunity with modifications to the regulations to quadruple that to 80 families. And that puts 80 different sets of boots on the ground in your downtown. But that's a discussion that, can't be done in a vacuum. So it's, do you just replicate what's there, or do you, push out a little bit on that, but honoring what was there, not just, you're not destroying and making it look like Redmond, Washington, or you're not, but if at some point you look at the little Wickford villages or even Stonington Borough, there are a lot of fishermen's house in Stonington Borough, and Stonington Borough struggles at times to retain that fisherman aspect of the single family working class smaller unit, as investments are being made in the community to try and build bigger houses where smaller houses were. But there, the borough is a good example of how 3 different scales of buildings play well with each other. And there are those examples right in Peacedale and Wakefield, but it's, Steve, you made a good call on the coffee shop that closed or was relocated in town, right? Cafe.
Yeah, I can't think of the name either.
Is it Cafe Bar, Brian?
I think it was Calf Bar.
Calf Bar, there you go.
Okay, that's a very small, almost cottage-like building. There's a vacant lot next to it. does the vacant lot look like the small single-family cottage, or does it look more like a building 3 units down that's 2.5 stories tall with a mansard roof? You know, what is the vision for that corridor? And hearing some of the discussion tonight, we'll try and give some good examples, or maybe have Donald Powers be involved in one of these meetings to have that discussion with you. Some aspects, if we went back really historically, we should all be in roundhouses or longhouses. Right? But the vernacular changes over time. But you are still a village and sea-orientated seashore community. I think whatever you do, you need to honor that and not try and look or aspire to be somewhere else. Not lose your identity. So Susan, good, very good point.
We do have a few attendees out there. Is there anyone that would like to comment or have a question on what Jamie has posted here for us tonight? If you do, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, Jamie.
I'm gonna, and again, we don't have it on these slides, but I'm gonna give you some densities. So a townhouse, the maximum density would be 12 dwelling units per acre. The manor house could be 15 dwelling units per acre. And the village apartments would be 20 dwelling units per acre. So I have a table, I'll share it with the planning board. I'll send it out to you. It's still kind of a work in progress with regards to the discussion on density. And again, to Susan and Pam's point, the conversion of the mansion house is, you have the mansion house, it's on, in most aspects, it's on an existing parcel. And that existing parcel could be 1/2 acre or 2 acres. So really the building potentially drives the density so long as you're able to park it. Right? So even if you're on a 1/2 acre in a big mansion house, you can't put 12 units in there if you can't fit 14 cars in the parking lot, 16 cars in the park, on the property. But if you had a mansion house on 2 acres, you have that conversion. I think a good example would be the Stone Mansion home to the east of the South Kingston Police Department, if everybody's familiar with that home that was just on the market. That was potentially, to me, a conversion for someone, potentially versus a single family home. That's the type of home that would have the ability to be converted to a mansion type with a higher density, even with an addition to it or an outbuilding on it. That was a larger piece of land.
Okay.
So that's what I have for you tonight. And again, I want to give a lot of credit to Jeff Davis and Horsley Wetton, as well as Union Studios, because sometimes I feel like I'm the messenger and they're doing the real heavy lifting based on our discussions. But I think we have a talented team put together. I've inherited it, but I'm fortunate to have inherited it because they are qualified individuals working within the structure of their overall consulting groups. I did send this out again in April. Everybody has a copy of this, the missing middle. And I really wanted to bring that up because at the last workshop, I showed you the top one, which is really an urban setting. And the second one that I had in my portfolio is much more appropriate discussion for South Kingston, where you really get to the cottage court and then you just get to the maximum of a 3-story mixed use building versus what someone would read as the Biltmore in Providence in the top graphic, or a much larger building. also love the fact that this graphic has the commercial aspect of starting with vendors and retailers and restaurateurs and pop-up tents to food trucks to kind of trade shows to village retail pods, then down to the brick and mortar building. So it kind of runs the gamut on kind of the missing middle for retail and restaurateurs.
Jamie, this is minor, but I'm just wondering, because this guidebook is really nice. The other night when at the comp plan, somebody said, and what's the missing middle? I just kind of think that, I like the idea of the visual guide to the missing middle. But people don't understand that. It's a great title, but people don't understand that. So either the title, you might want to change that or whatever. But regardless, inside, I think that, where you say a visual guide to missing middle housing, colon townhouse, and then you say apartments. I guess I would change it, and I would just say, I would put townhouse on the first page, on the first line, and then a visual guide to missing middle, because I think that's very artistic and very clever, but inside, I'm just looking at like page 5. I would put townhouse in big letters. I just think that that's the highlight there, and people, so I just think that using some more common terms might be useful, but that's just my thought.
Well, for somebody that doesn't follow this every day, that the terminology might be easier for them to find what they're looking for or understand.
Yeah.
So that might be a good point, Pam.
I in the work that I do, we deal with 5th grade and 7th grade writing levels for the public. And that's not to downgrade anybody or not, but that's, again, this is more of a professional, but I still think that, townhouse highlighted versus the other might be more useful.
Or highlighting the aspect that you're talking about multifamily, not single family.
Okay.
Thank you, Pam.
Are we ready to move on to the next topic on our work session here,
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
which was the permitting process? I'm
Mr.
sorry,
Chairman,
we had farm events, but
we get the permitting process.
we kind of did discuss that already. We're in the consensus that we're going to move that off into the fall.
I would say early fall.
Okay.
We'll come back to that.
Was there anything else that needed to be said on that tonight from board members?
Only that when we do have that conversation, there needs to be adequate background information given both,
Yeah.
for projects that we've reviewed and issues that have come up related to that topic.
Okay. All right, so we'll move on to the permitting process.
So, Mr. Chairman, as you're aware, a couple members have brought this up with regards to having a brief discussion tonight about the overall permitting process and kind of introducing the subject matter. Again, we have some new board members who I think it falls within the education, it falls in with the following through on process, understanding the entire, we'll say cradle to grave kind of expression of an application is thought of by a developer, maybe a conversation's had with planning board staff, Then you have the application process, then you have the post-approval process, construction, certificate of occupancy, dotting i's, crossing t's, to people moving in. And part of it education, part of it understanding, and see if we need to make any improvements on the planning board staff side or any recommendations to others, whether it's permitting forms, following through checks and balances. And I'll stop there and let any other planning board, if that's okay with you, Mr. Chairman, weigh
Yeah.
in. I think it's a much broad, I think it's almost a whole work session night with council probably involved in the majority of it and me listening.
Yeah, I mean, some of the minor changes that have come about in the last couple of years with the TRC reviews before they come to the planning board, the pre-app for them to come in and get some opinions from the how the board feels about what they're presenting before they actually, you know, sit down and draw something and bring it into us. I think has been helpful, but I'll open it up from there.
I think it's definitely, as Jamie suggested, worthy of an entire work session to discuss the process. I have been very disappointed in some of the projects outcomes recently, particularly those that were comprehensive permits. I think we need to find a better way. We need to have a methodology that allows for not only 25% affordable units, but a greater percentage without either destroying the site or having a poor quality end product. Also, our meeting last week with a comprehensive plan listening session, I think it was important to have that, even though the number of participants was not terribly high, but I found it very difficult not to have a conversation and be able to answer those questions, because I think the folks that spoke were spot on. They were valid concerns. And I think we owe it to the public to have those conversations with them. I understand their frustrations, and I do not think that any of those comments should be regarded as being NIMBYism at all. I think that our process can and should be improved. And I think we as a board need to look back and say, gee, that project turned out really nicely. That's what we had in mind. And then maybe this other one did not. And how can we do a better job? So it goes beyond just, all right, we know what pre-app and master plan and preliminary is, but how can we either modify our regulations, whether it's with regard to a checklist or time frame or what have you, and create a better end product that we can all feel satisfied with and that the public can understand.
Okay. Other comments from board members? Susan?
I would welcome a meeting on this topic. I don't feel like I received any training when I joined this board, and I'm kind of flying blind. And I think a process training, for me at least, would be very helpful. And I also feel like, especially with comprehensive permits, that I feel like I'm being held hostage by the boogeyman in Providence who's going to make us do things we're not ready to do. There are some projects that I would like to have a clearer understanding, maybe directly from SHAB, on what I'm permitted or not permitted to try to affect change when a project comes before us. And I think I would love to have a meeting with, or even a little work session with SHAB to understand firsthand exactly how much leeway we have in denying or changing projects to fit our South Kingstown vision. I think I would also like to understand a little clearer the relationship between planning board members and the public and the staff and developers, and what are we allowed, who are we allowed to talk to, who are we not talking to, who's allowed to call us and discuss projects. Like I guess I'd like some clear guidance on also the, not necessarily ethics, but in what's expected of privacy and discretion and things like that would be helpful to me.
Paul?
Yeah, I have that. What Susan just said about, who can we talk to and when? Not knowing that, I don't talk to anyone ever.
Oh, it's the best way.
Which-
If you're not in a public meeting, it's,
Right, but I mean, it feels very limiting. Like, I feel like I can't really talk to, I guess I can talk to other board members so long as we're not a quorum. And I know that I can talk to town staff when I have questions, but yeah, I mean, if somebody called me, a friend in town and said, hey, about this development, I think I would say to them, you really need to come to the next planning board meeting and ask your question there. I
And
don't know
Paul,
if
you have that Paul, you have that exactly right, because any of these topics could potentially come before you. And there's Rhode Island Supreme Court case law that says you'd be conflicted out if any of those matters, I mean, it's pretty obvious, right? If you're going to be deciding down the line a matter, you
Sure.
cannot be commenting and giving your opinion ahead of time prior to hearing the evidence. So
Right.
I know it's tough, but you outlined the procedure perfectly. You can talk to town staff anytime you want. You can talk to another board member as long as it doesn't constitute a quorum or a rolling quorum where you talk first to one, then another, then
Right.
another. Certainly, if you have a general conversation with your neighbors and with townspeople about the comp plan or whatever, but with individual projects, I would stay away from any conversations.
Right. Okay. Good to know.
Sorry, Mike, can I just
Sure, Susan.
confirm? I am not allowed to talk to any developers who have any projects before us.
You should not be. That is totally 100% correct.
Okay, even if it's not specifically about that project, I'm in a gray area that I need to avoid at all costs, right?
Well, yeah. So that's the easy, hard and fast rule. Just don't talk to them because it's always easier to simply not to. Technically, if it's not something that's before you or coming before you, yes, but wow, that's a slippery slope to me because you might get entrapped and you don't want that to happen. Not all of our developers are in the worthy category.
Okay. That's really good, Mike. Thank you.
And the other thing I think that now that we are in a slightly better place with regard to COVID is that site visits are a really important element, I think, in the process. And particularly when there are complex projects, we need to really think about having those site visits.
yeah, the one on South Road and Curtis Corner was a good example of that, with the elevation changes and the wetlands and the trees that we were trying to save. So always worthy to get our feet on the ground.
Definitely.
So
So, Mr.
Right.
Chairman, if we work on, I think, as I said earlier, it's important, this is an important subject matter, especially the training. I've been involved in a lot of communities where that's literally one of the first things I've been asked to do. You're fortunate that we have excellent counsel and access to counsel, and they're at all of our meetings, which is very unique and actually a pleasure and unique circumstance to be involved in. We have top-notch legal guidance at our disposal. For the next work session, if I work with the chairman, if I can knock off some of the program aspects of it in the preceding month and kind of via email send them out and get comments and feedback back, we may be able to tick that off quickly at the next meeting and then perhaps have a broader discussion on permitting process.
okay. Sounds like a plan. You've muted, Maria.
And Jamie, you would send that out to all of the board members, correct?
Absolutely, yeah.
Great,
Absolutely.
thank you.
And that would be important too, because unfortunately Pam will be leaving us shortly. And we'll have another new member that will probably have some of the same questions Paul and Susan have, so.
Pam could always change her mind and has to be reappointed by the town council.
Yeah, she could.
And I think also having.
They
when we
probably
talk ab-
already reappointed somebody.
They didn't.
No,
When we have conversations about process, I think it's important to involve DPS as well, because they're an integral part of the planning process, even though the board may not always be aware of the day-to-day details that they're involved with. I think it's important to have those conversations with them. We have had some suggestions from Rich Bourbonnais in particular as to modifications that would make the process better.
Well, I think with last night's town council meeting and the new additional natural resource person they're planning to hire, that'll be another tool for the planning board, the highway department, so it be more feet on the ground to look at some of these issues when the developer actually starts to work the sites.
And the Conservation Commission, as I said earlier,
Mm.
having a joint work session with them with regard to LID and climate change issues would be invaluable, I think.
All right. If we're ready to move on, Maria, any update on the Route 1 scenic highway?
We're meeting on Thursday after a year-plus hiatus and looking forward to it.
Okay, I guess you'll have something to report in the near future.
I will.
And Joe's not with us tonight, but the town council did, oh, go ahead, Brian. Yeah, you were there. Why don't you explain it?
Yeah, so, yeah, in Joe's absence, I'll report back on the town council meeting last night where there were two proposed ordinances put forth by the Affordable Housing Collaborative. The first one was a proposed amendment to the Affordable Housing Fund. The existing ordinance basically created a fund that the town could put money in, that people could donate money to or donate property to, but it didn't create a lot of process for the opposite end of the equation, getting the money out into projects, getting the donated land repurposed into affordable housing projects. So the amendments were mainly aimed at creating that process on the back end. The other piece of legislation that was put forward was a new ordinance. It was an amendment to the municipal tax code, allowing for tax relief for accessory dwelling units in two different manners. One was for a 5-year tax abatement for the creation of any new accessory dwelling unit. The idea being we'd like to stimulate the creation of those types of units because they represent a form of smaller, lower cost housing that is not available in town. The second element was a 30-year or longer tax exemption for any of those ADUs that were deed restricted for affordable housing in accordance with the state low and moderate income housing act. So, we hope that the two of those will stimulate a little bit of development in the areas where ADUs are allowed.
And he spent quite a bit of time last night with the council explaining that and answering a lot of questions. So
2
congratulations on
hours to
getting
be
that done.
exact.
Mike was watching the clock.
So, all right. Legal issues? Anything to report, Mike?
Amy just wanted me to update you on two matters at the Village at Curtis Corner. The first involved the possible historic cemetery on the property. I believe the engineering consultant is waiting for, is it state approval, Jamie?
State approval to undertake investigations on the.
So that's ongoing, and we're waiting. The other one is that I believe, Jamie, you're the one who has made it absolutely clear to Alex Petrucci with regard to the approval of the plan design. It has to be submitted for final approval. This is the architectural design. I guess he was looking for some informal approval when he was last there, the end of April. But he needs to go through that very formal process and put it before you during final plan approval. And he now knows that clearly, hopefully. Those are the only two items Amy wanted me to bring you up to date with.
Mike, does your reference to the final stage of the project just refer to architecturals, or does it mean that the project is on hold pending the architectural investigation?
Well, here's what it says. The applicant shall submit final architectural design, including floor plan, square footage for the proposed single-family units and duplex units to the planning board for review and approval at the final plan in order to determine compliance with those square footage requirements with regard to the average size of the LMI duplex units being within 5% of the size of market rate, et cetera. There's a whole series of things under it. So I believe the answer is yes. You are going to have the final say before they can go forward.
Now, Mr. Chairman, I know the planning board had a presentation from Alex and Eric Creevy and John Kenyon about the schematics and new renderings. And I think the renderings that were discussed at your last meeting are in keeping with what was approved by the planning board with regards to architecture. But again, that needs a formal approval at final, that there's no opportunity for an interim approval, that if anything were constructed on the site, that the developer is doing that at his own risk, perhaps with the assumption that approval will be received since the architecture is in essence identical to what was originally approved. I'm not sure if that answers Maria's question.
Not really. The way that this project has unfolded with the whole historic cemetery and notice having been given to the planning department is upsetting for us as a board, because we try to be really thorough and accurate, and there has not been a lot of, or had not been a lot of give from this particular applicant, and then to find out that there was a historic cemetery that was should have been researched early on is disturbing. And I would like to know that pending results of that, what the process would be, and obviously how do we prevent something like this from happening again. But again, going forward, where are we at? I assume that there would be a sort of stop construction or stop clearing. And I know that there was a discussion at our meeting that an area is going to be roped off, but I don't know how that was necessarily determined, or again, what the options are going forward to try to mitigate the circumstances here.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, the discussion was a 150-foot buffer around the area that was identified as SK 198, I believe, is the reference to that potentially historic cemetery. And that was something that the developer committed to. He also retained the services of PAL, the Public Archaeological Laboratories out of Pawtucket, and also has made statements to the effect that if something is found there, that he is committed to maintaining that site in an undeveloped manner, and perhaps even constructing a walled or recreating what would be a kind of historic walled-in cemetery. And those are the discussions I've had with the developer. The applicant does own a piece of property, and there are certain things they're allowed to do, so long as they pull the appropriate permits with regards to ground disturbance and erosion sedimentation control, and they have obtained those permits from John Shock's department. And I know Rich Bourbonnais has been on site, as well as other inspectors associated with that permit for ground disturbance and erosion sedimentation control. And they did walk the limits of clearing. The limits of clearing were identified in the field and reviewed prior to any disturbance on the site.
Jamie, can I ask about the process? Should they determine that that cemetery is indeed occupied, do we go back to looking at the original engineering drawings again, because it's a house, lot, a driveway, and part of a road? What's the process to go back and change plans or something to work around a cemetery?
I need to interrupt at this point. Excuse me, Steve, at this point, I need a motion to add Village at Curtis Corner to the agenda, because this has become more than just a quick report from the solicitor, and I want to be in compliance with OMA. So if you could just have a motion to add for discussion, Village at Curtis Corner status.
If somebody make that motion,
I'll make that motion.
I have a
Second.
second from Paul. Any discussion? All those in favor, raise your hand. It's unanimous. Okay.
Sorry
Thank
to
you.
interrupt you, Susan.
No,
I'm
that's
sorry,
fine.
Mike, I started talking out of turn, so I'm sorry about that.
No, thank you, Mike. My thoughts were similar to your statement. Again, it would be determined on the extent of what they find, Susan. There's a possibility that what they find is contained within one single parcel that was proposed for development. That would make the discussion easy. The applicant could potentially just commit to not developing on that, and council would guide us on whether revisions need to be made to the plans, or whether the applicant just submits documentation that that lot will be conserved and not built on. So I think, I don't want to call it premature to determine what the permitting process is, but until we know more, and again, I know I spoke with Alex this morning, and he was awaiting the permission from the state archaeological office to do that exploration with his consultant. And again, he did retain, my understanding is he did retain the services of that archaeological specialty firm the day after the planning board's meeting. So, and then the appropriate permits were put in with the state. So they're waiting. And again, time will determine whether anything is there and how to react to that. But again, Mr. Petrucci has been very positive in the discussions with regards to honoring and respecting anything that is found there.
All right. Any further comments from planning board members?
Mr. Chairman, we do have,
I see Alex has got his hand raised, so
he does have his hand raised.
Brian, can you bring him in? Alex, I'll take limited comment tonight because we didn't really advertise this. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Alex.
Ryan, is he still there, or did we lose him?
Now
No, he
he's un-
unmuted.
Go ahead, Alex. Please identify yourself.
This is Alex Petrucci Quilkin. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I just want to bring up the board. so to hear it right from my lips. I had no knowledge in any way, shape, or form of this so-called cemetery. It was missed by the lawyers, it was missed by the town, it was missed by everything. It was a total mistake. There's no way we would ever do something like this. Obviously, this town knows me and have been with me for 25 years. I immediately hired the best I could find. I had my lawyers do an extensive title searches. There is no record whatsoever of a cemetery on that property. The GPS readings that are under the so-called identification of this cemetery do not match the GPS readings of where this cemetery supposedly is. Matter of fact, it's a good quarter of a mile away, according to the GPS readings. So I think that the bodies were moved, the family members were moved the way that John Kenyon's research says, and so far under PAL's research. But that doesn't stop us from being 100% sure by going out there with a permit from the state of Rhode Island and scrape the property and do what we have to do to make sure there is absolutely nothing there. And if they do find something there, there will be a wall built around that area and it will restore the cemetery. And if we lose a lot, well, that to be is to be. I just want this board to understand that I will do everything in my power to make sure that this job is done and done correctly.
Well, thank you, Alex. That's good to hear. All right. Anything else, Jamie?
Just along that, and I know it's, we ran through planning department staff real quick, but I wanted to thank all the planning board members who attended the listening session. It was an extra night out. There was some additional discussion at the council meeting last night about potentially having another opportunity for receiving public comments. They do have a scheduled hearing on the 24th. I'll be working with the town manager, Rob Zaneski, on seeing if there's another avenue that we're not exploring. But my experience has been that, you know, you start out with hundreds of people, and as you go through, even in a more expedited manner of a 12 or 18-month process, that number lessens or dwindles over time. And my biggest concern would be if I ever worked in a community and we had 200 people who started at the beginning and we had 200 people at the end. Because if we had 200 people at the end, we certainly missed something along the way. That we still had 200 concerned citizens at the end of the document. But, you know, I think public input's important. We do have the videos have been up on our webpage for over a week. We have our PowerPoint presentations available on our webpage. We have information associated with the comprehensive plan on our webpage. And again, we'll be working with the town manager's office on information.
Yeah, well, I think we had 19 attendees at one point in that, and I think that was probably more than we had when we had our public hearing. So it's sometimes hard to get public input, and somebody doesn't have an issue, they don't necessarily come out. Yes, Pam.
I guess I missed it, but I think that anyway, I think that the point has been made that some people didn't even know about it, even though some emails were sent out and public notices and such. And I still think that the planning board could have, and the town, I should say, can have better options about sending out press releases. And I don't know if you did for this, but to have the local newspapers doing articles about them, and we're just not seeing that. Or I'm not seeing that. I get one of the local newspapers, but I think that those kinds of, different kinds of things to do for that should be explored for this and other projects, because I think that, I actually personally have a hard time when I get the emails pressing on, the thing, getting to the, identifying where the agenda is sometimes, because it gets you into that swirl of whatever the program is that you guys use. And sometimes it works for me. And I don't know if it's because I'm on my phone or my computer, and other times it doesn't. And so it's just not, maybe I'm just old fashioned, but I just really think that if we're trying to, it gives people the impression, and I've heard this from people, not about this in particular, but in terms of zoning issues and planning board issues, that it gives people the impression that the town is not interested to hear. And so I just offer that. I know that we've talked about maybe other options. And so I just offer that either for this or for the future, for in general. And because in the future, I'll be on the other side.
Well,
But
you
I'll
know
send
where
you
to
some
look
emails
then.
anyway.
I agree with wholeheartedly with what Pam just said. I watched part of the meeting last night, and there was a reference made that the planning board members were overburdened or something, which is not correct. We are willing and able to hear from the public and appreciate that they make the effort to speak to us. And as I said earlier, it was frustrating that it was a listening session and then we couldn't have a conversation with them or answer any of their truly relevant questions. So I do think we can do much better, and welcome the opportunity.
Can I just say, this is Paul Jordan. I think also there's an expectation. I mean, I heard a couple of people say that I made comments and they weren't included in the plan. And I think, well, okay, that doesn't mean they weren't heard and considered, but not every comment's going to make it into the plan.
It needs a consensus.
Yeah, I wonder, where the town is with things like Facebook and Twitter and getting, I think sometimes stuff like, you've got to say something 20, 30 times. There's going to be a meeting. We're going to talk about the comp plan. Here's why you should care. And you've got to say it over and over and over again in a lot of different channels to get people's attention. And then, they miss it and they come back and say, well, there was no opportunity for me to speak. And you just have to kind of nod. But I think the more that we can do to get it out, not just the newspaper, but, all the social media, things that people look at these days, competing for their attention. Probably the way to go.
Mr. Chairman, just on behalf of the planning board, your director did write a news flash and press release and push that out through the town manager's office to the appropriate, and that they were going to forward that to the appropriate channels. So the department ran it through its paces with regards to that news flash, and that was done at the end of the month. I think it was dated April 30th or so. But again, actually April 30th was the date of that press release and news flash. And we can't control it, whether the paper picks it up or not.
Yeah,
So-
newspaper coverage over the last couple of years has dramatically changed. Susan?
So can I just clarify, are we doing another session for the public?
We haven't heard, but I mean, again, we had 19 people. I think 5 or 6 spoke.
Right.
It's to me, it's before the town council right now. They've had one public hearing. They've continued it. The planning board has approved the draft and moved it forward to them for their action.
Steve, we do have a hand raised that is a town council member who might be speaking to this exact issue.
Okay. Now let's bring her in, if you please, Jess Rose.
Thank you, Brian.
You're muted, Jess, still.
Hi,
There you
sorry.
go.
I first wanted to just take a second and thank you guys for everything that you do. I think that, you don't get the credit that you deserve. Last night, I was the town council member that had requested a second meeting. I've had the opportunity to speak with a couple of members of the planning board today, and I don't think it's fair to ask you guys to come back to do a second meeting. You've put everything into this, and I want you guys to know that I'm going to do everything on my part to get links of the presentation that you gave to the town council, to get those posted on our town Facebook page, to get them posted on the town website. I'll be posting them on my personal town page and asking that people take the time to review the meetings that you've already made available to us, and to reach out via email if they have further comments or concerns that they think you guys could address. I appreciate, I can't tell you enough how much I appreciate you and the work. We tasked you with pulling this comp plan together in less than a month. And from where you were when we all came on board as a new council, and you did it, and you did it well. So I thank you. And if I can be of any assistance to you all, please let me know. I'm happy to do that. So thank you. And please know that you are so appreciated.
Thank you very much. So, all right, if there's no other comments from board members or staff, that's the end of our work session. So I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Do we have a second? Pam, we'll give it to you just in case it's your last one. So all in favor, raise your hand. It's unanimous. Mike, I'm sorry we kept you to 9:20, but
Oh, much better than 11:50.
okay. We'll see you another time, I hope.
You better believe it. Thank you. In all seriousness, it was good to connect with you all again. I will definitely do it more often.
All right. Take care. Thanks,
Everyone,
everyone.
take care. Bye-bye.
Right.
Good night.